Good evening.
Hello. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, how are you? Happy to be
Good.
here.
Thanks for being here with us, Matt. Hi everybody. I'm Mike. With me we have a very special guest, Melissa Foster, and Matt. I'm gonna let you do the introductions. Also, we have Dr. Matthew Edwards. Matt, take it away.
Yes, I'm excited to have Melissa here today. Melissa and I connected last summer at the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute. She's a teacher at Northwestern University, yes, the Northwestern up in Chicago, and active working with singers in the Chicago area, working with singers through one of the programs that offshoots of Lyric Opera Chicago. She studied all kinds of vocal techniques from speech level singing to ESL, voice method stuff to what we teach at the CCM Pedagogy Institute. And does a lot of work in a variety of different styles, everything from pop to rock, R&B, disco, hip hop, rap. We're going to be talking about some of those things tonight and about the great work that she does about helping singers learn how to really dive into what's behind all those styles to bring them to life. So looking forward to a great chat tonight. I see people coming on in. We'll be taking questions throughout. So if you do have a question, you can throw them up in the chat. And I think it's always best to have our guests kind of tell us a little bit about themselves. So, and their backstory. So Melissa, why don't you kind of tell us about how you've gotten to where you are today?
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name's Melissa, as they've said. I live in Chicago with my family. And let's see my background. Well, like a lot of teachers, I started with a classical background. I thought I was going to be an opera singer from 8th grade, which I think is really young to decide that career. But somebody told me that I should be one. So that's, there you go. And I actually went to Northwestern for my undergrad and studied with the goddess Karen Brunson.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
I mean,
she's on the show here too before. She's a great teacher. That's awesome.
She's my idol. And I was, trucking along. I actually also studied music theater at the same time. And I was growing up, I'm old. So I was growing up in the time where crossover was easier to do than it was today because the musicals that were big were Showboat and Les Mis and Phantom. So, it not that you can't cross over, but it was just much easier for the brain to switch those gears. And I was actually going to leave school early to go do an apprenticeship at Central City Opera in Denver. And I got sick. I got the flu. And after that, something started to happen and we couldn't figure out why I couldn't talk, which was a problem because I was an opera major and I was in the middle of doing the magic flute. So that was a problem. And it ended up being a 2-year struggle where we tried to figure it out. And it was a big mystery and there were a lot of guesses. We finally got me talking again, but I couldn't sing. And it was just a thing. No problem. But I didn't know what I was going to do because I thought I was going to go off and do this opera career. And now I can talk sometimes and not other times. And I really can't sing. And so my voice teacher from high school was retiring. And she said, "Do you want my studio?" And I was 22 and said, I guess. And she handed me probably 30 students and I loved teaching. So, but what I found is that I really loved teaching musical theater and pop. It's not that I didn't like teaching, the 24 Italian art songs. They're really great, but my joy and my passion was just really lighting up at what I didn't understand. So I was like, well, you always hear if you can sing classical, you can sing anything, right? And I'm like, but that's not proving true. And I don't know why. So then I sort of started going on this quest to find out. And that's when I started studying all the different methods. And so many great people that I've observed and studied with, Lisa Papil, the Estel model, SLS, Tom Burke, so many, there's so many great teachers and you watch and you learn and you read. And I just fascinated with continuing to learn every day and figuring it out. So that brings me to 2015, and I'm flying back and forth to teach in my studio in New York, and I caught a cold on the plane. And I got off the plane and I couldn't talk. I know you're like, why does this keep coming back? But so here we go again. And luckily Northwestern was amazing, but I did have to take a leave. And we finally, with 3 neurology teams, figured this out. Thank you, Northwestern Neurology, North Shore, and Columbia in New York, with brain surgeons, that I have a major artery that's twisted around a major nerve in my brainstem. And that is what causes all of the interesting problems. And I'm telling you this story because I like to demystify the issue of when singers have vocal problems of any sort, that it's shameful or a secret. Because I'm a voice teacher who sometimes can't talk. And so I'm mic'd everywhere I go, which is why if you do hear a little bit of an echo, I'm always just mic'd. And my students know that, and it's cool as a cucumber, and I'm always drinking tea. So you'll see me with a mug, right? So that is just, those 2 things come with me. I'm thankful that we figured it out, and now I'm here really interested in music theater and pop rock styles.
Yeah, what an amazing story. I mean, I think you're right. It's really important to demystify voice injuries, because so many students, they when at Shenandoah, when I first got here, they used to be freaked out and afraid to tell anybody. And I was like, dude, football players get hurt. Who cares? And we have really kind of changed it to a who cares culture, because first of all, we don't have that many that do anymore, because we've got great teachers, great faculty. It's usually a re-injury of something that happened. But if an athlete gets injured, it's possible to re-injure. And I think that it's just, like you said, just taking the stigma away and being like, if it happens, okay, we'll get you to a doctor. We'll get you fixed up.
Right. And it took me, like I said, 5 years to figure out that it's a brain thing, and loud and proud. So yeah, but now I'm getting to do a bunch of cool things. COVID is obviously devastating. But I've managed to meet some really great people and start some really amazing projects that I'm really excited about, that delve deeper into this passion that I have about pop rock styles and hip hop.
So I know you've got some projects that are public and some others. You want to talk about any of the ones that are public knowledge so far?
Sure. What can I say? Yes, I'm doing some amazing work, more shout outs, with the Rock the Audition team, with Sherry Sanders and Ron Veo Daniel, about rap and hip hop. So we're doing a lot of work there. I am cooking up a great workshop with Michelle Marquardt Deveau, which is another guest here, and Jeff Baldwin. So we're working on something for you that's coming out soon. And let's see, I'm developing hip hop curriculum for Northwestern, so that's exciting. And then some things I can't talk about, but I'm really, I'm like, let's just say I'm writing something.
Nice, good tease.
So yeah.
Well, one of the things that we, we're talking about, and have, had a lot of great conversations around, is this idea of making sure that singers really understand the culture and history of the styles of music they sing. So, how have you kind of come to this work yourself, and how are, what are some of the things, that you've come into as far as, teaching and training young singers?
Well, and I'm going to loop this, I'm going to start with pop. I'm going to loop it to music theater, and then loop it back to pop, if that's okay. But everything builds. I mean, it's kind of like life, but everything is a scaffold. Everything builds off the next thing. And so you will become a better performer if you understand that. So that's the simple way of saying that, right? Yeah. Also, it's fascinating. So if you think about it, there's so many kinds of pop. I could list them for the rest of Facebook Live. But there's gospel. You've got gospel, and you've got blues, and you've got jazz, and then country comes in there, and you got folk, and you got rock, and I know we're going to talk about that. You got soul, you got funk, you got disco, you got R&B, you got hip hop, and you can switch some of those orders around. But if you listen to an R&B song, you're gonna hear influences of blues and jazz, right? And gospel. So the more you listen, and the more you immerse yourself in those cultures that created those kinds of music, and the more you understand what was going on in the world that created and made that music sound like it did, the more you will enjoy singing it, be better at singing it, and be able to bring yourself authentically to it, and you'll feel so much more comfortable in your own skin in all of these different styles. So that's my thought on pop.
Yeah.
If I can talk about music theater.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I can shut up too.
No, talk about music theater. Yeah.
I'm just going to talk about pop and music theater. Pop, as you know, I'm sure these listeners know, there are pop rock musicals and jukebox musicals, have taken over. And even if they're not, even if they have original scores, a lot of contemporary musical theaters are in the pop rock style. But within that, you say, okay, well, pop rock musicals, well, that's so many too, so just like pop music. I'm so excited. Can you tell? Can you tell I like talking about this?
I love it. Yeah. What's cool too is pop rock musical theater is so brand new. It had its other stuff, but it's really flourished, right? In the last 20 years.
Correct. And even though those things might be written now, they still, throw back and, are set in different time periods and written, with different pop styles in mind. So, if you're all of a sudden finding yourself, let's just say you're a music theater junkie, you don't listen to pop music. I have lots of students like this, and that's great. Totally, whatever floats your boat, that's awesome. But now you're cast in, or you're asked to audition for, All Shook Up. Okay, well, they're probably going to ask for a pop song, or let's just say you're in it. Great. But then you should know about, those like 50s and 60s styles, and you should listen to some rockabilly. Like you should listen to Elvis, obviously, because it's an Elvis musical. But like you should also listen to Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly. Let's say you put in Hairspray, right? Well, okay, but that's you're like, okay, well, that's sort of that time period. I'm like, well, yeah, but if you listen to the soundtrack of All Shook Up and Hairspray, they're not going to sound the same. And so then you're like, okay, well, why? And you're like, okay, because Hairspray has much more of a Motown feel. So then I would listen to the Supremes and Jackson 5 and Smokey Robinson, right? And then, okay, you got another musical, Hair, okay? All right, sure. That was actually written a while ago, but I love the show. So we'll talk about it, and it's a great rock musical. Well, that's in my head. I think that's got a lot of styles in it, but let's talk about the introduction of like classic rock. So like you should be listening to some Jimi Hendrix and some Janis and, things like that. And you should also be listening to some soul. So like you should pop some Aretha Franklin in your earbuds, right? All right, fine. If I'm still back way back, musical set back there. Okay, Beautiful, right? Which is Carole King music, one of the greats. But you shouldn't just listen to Carole King. You should also listen to like the Mamas and the Papas and the Carpenters. And then she wrote songs for so many other people, right? And they're in the musical. So like you should listen to the Chiffons because they're in the musical, right? Okay, so then, okay, great.
One of the things that's really cool, I don't know if you come across the Discover app on the phone, iPhones and Android.
No.
If you are going, how do I find all these different artists that Melissa's talking about? Check on your smartphone. It's it's Discover without an E at the end. In the Discover app, you type in the name of an artist. So like the Siobhans, you put that in there, and then it uses artificial intelligence to tell you what other bands are like them. And then you can connect the app to your Spotify account, and then you can play excerpts of the top 5 to 10 songs on each artist that's like that person. Then if you like that artist, you click on them, and it gives you a tree of artists that are like.
You just made it. It's for everybody. There you go. That's your gift for tuning in today.
Yeah.
That is amazing, and I want to do it. That'll make my life easier, and I feel like I know something.
You know, I mean, of course, you got on Spotify, you have the related artists.
Sure.
That can also help too. But that Discover app, it's cool. It's well organized. It's a great way for students to find music if they're trying to audition for one of these shows, and the only person they know is, oh, it's an Elvis musical. Well, who else was like Elvis? I don't know. Pull out your Discover app. You'll start to find out.
That's awesome.
That's great.
That's amazing, you know, and I mean, this goes. I don't know if I can go on for a minute, but you know, and I'll
go for
musicals. I promise. I guess I'm this excited about everything, right? With these topics because I love them. But you know, I don't know. I mean, so if I totally switch gears and I get out of, you know, back. Thank you. If I get back out of, you know, the 50s and the 60s and I move forward like a little bit, like. Or back a little bit, I don't know. Depends on which way you look at it. But like, let's think of bluegrass. So what's a bluegrass musical? Bright Star.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that's an awesome show and, you know, an amazing score. But if I were cast, I don't listen to bluegrass that much. So if I were cast in that, I would really need to do some homework, right? And so I would need to be like, you know, and I would listen to Bill Monroe. Okay. But like Alison Krauss. Okay. And then I'd probably use Discover app and find some more. Right. Because I'd want to know why that music sounds like that. And you want to start picking out, you're like, okay, well, what are the instruments in this? And, you know, what are the vocal styles in this? And I'm going to lead into those, you know, in a sec, but I'll keep going. You know, and then I'm like, okay, fine. Let's throw back all the way to jazz. Let's switch gears completely. And I'm like, jazz musicals. Okay, I'm gonna go like outside the box with one and say City of Angels because I think of that as more like a mainstream musical. But I feel like even though with that, like you still have to know jazz, right? So you should listen to Ella Fitzgerald. And Billie Holiday and Nat King Cole and even Frank Sinatra. Like you should, if you're gonna, I don't know, you'll enjoy your role better, right?
Well, then also look at I think too, like with a movie like, or not a movie, a musical like City of Angels that has so much film involved with it is going back and watching those older black and white movies and getting a taste for that part of culture at the time as well. So it's also a lot to me is beyond just the music culture is understanding what was happening in society at the time of everything that was going on. What were people wearing? Like I have a book in my office that's got fashion from every decade. And so when we're going through the different pop rock styles in person, I'll put the book on my piano and they'll walk in as they're getting stuff set up. I'll say, look at what you would have been wearing in 1970. And they're like, oh my gosh, that. And it's always fun too, just because those are the things that like we don't always as singers spend the time to dive into, but man, it makes a world of difference because the way that you're going to move dressed in what you would wear in the 1960s versus what you would wear today is different. And what was considered, you know, sultry or, you know, scandalous in the 1950s and 60s isn't even close to today. Right. So, you know, realizing that, I mean, you know, people forget that Elvis Presley was banned from TV for 3 weeks because he shook his hips.
Cracks me up, right? And that, you know, and the Beatles were they were evil. I mean, they were evil. And you know, terrifying to parents. And, you know, well, let's not even get into rap, but we will get into rap.
Yes.
You know, so, you know, and I mean, you know, you could keep going and you could go up, you know, you could go through, you know, Mamma Mia, you know, because that's disco. And I know we're going to talk about disco later. So, you know, but let's
go ahead and jump into some of that here.
Yeah. You know?
Yeah. So first question teed up here: how have culture and history shaped R&B? So can you dive into that a little bit more?
So much. So, sure. I mean, and I'm gonna keep this short because I know we want to talk about a lot of things. So I'm gonna keep it short. I mean, so rhythm and blues, right? And it's so funny because I actually have to say to my students, like, what does R&B stand for? Like, if we're breaking it down, right? And they obviously, you know the answer. You say rhythm and blues. I'm like, okay, what do those words mean? You know, okay, well, rhythm, obviously, blues, music. Okay, well, what was blues music like? You know, and you can connect the dots and see the influences right there, right? And you know that there are differing opinions of like the birth of R&B. So I will not get into that debate because that could take forever, you know, but I'm going to say that it definitely comes from jazz, gospel, blues, and, you know, and soul. Right. But like also some rock, you know, like if you think of like Tina Turner, right. I think R&B stems all the way back to the 40s. That's when I would put it. Right, truly starting in my head. So that's like Ray Charles. I'm dropping a lot of artist names. I hope that's okay.
No, it's great.
Okay. And Laverne Baker. But when you're thinking about it, you think of R&B today, right? And so that's artists like, so now if I like jump way forward, now we're in the like the Beyonce, right? And the Mariah Carey, but I'm going to say Michael Jackson and I'm going to say Prince because that's my all-time favorite. You know, and Nelly and Usher and Rihanna and Ariana Grande and Alicia Keys. I mean, you know, or Luther Vandross, it depends, you know, what do you classify R&B? But like, how have culture and history shaped it? Oh my gosh. Well, okay. Like I said, I was going to keep this short. So if we're going back to the 40s, the world, you know, America is extremely segregated. And I mean, our listeners know what segregation means, but, you know, obviously very, very separate and unequal treatment. And it's interesting because if I say it comes from jazz, I'm just going to reference. I feel like African-American music, going all the way back to, you know, slavery even before, but like definitely spirituals, is resistance, resilience, and a reflection of the continuous struggle. So rhythm and blues, you know, the blues, it is, see, I'm getting all like, but you know, it's a release. It's our way of communicating. And, you know, and I'll talk about that more when we get to rap for sure. But rhythm and blues is our way. I mean, there's communication, there's rising above, right? There's making our own music that hopefully isn't going to get stolen and remade by a white artist, and then and that artist makes a lot of money. So I hope I sort of answered that question. I danced a little bit around, like, you know, I could talk about stylisms in it if we want to talk about music, but I'm just sort of saying like what R&B means to me as far as when I think it was born and what people think of today.
No, but I think you hit it on the head. And I think that that's the important thing for students to study, is that we are so far removed from that in most ways. Of course, we've seen how the world hasn't changed in many other ways recently in the news. But for our students to watch us talking tonight and realize in 1940 that wasn't allowed. Like if there was the internet back then, we couldn't be having this talk right now. That's mind blowing. Right. And for the students, though, to go back and understand that, because it was that grief, it was that suffering. It was, you know, after the Civil War, all of a sudden you had the Black Americans all of a sudden, you know, moving throughout the country and dealing with all kinds of other issues working in factories, moving into big cities, the boll weevil issue that killed cotton crops, that made people move. And as they moved, they took their music with them. And I think all of that really is important to understand, like you said, the beginning of this style because of its blues roots. To go back and listen to those early people like Robert Johnson and hear how they were singing and playing. And it's so different than what we think of the blues today, but it's full of all those life experiences that were unique to Black Americans. And so to truly appreciate and understand the style, you need to go back and understand that, because it's humanity behind the music that drives the style. It wasn't like they just sat down and said, oh, today I will write an R&B song with these traits. No, it was what was passed down through their culture, through their history, that made them write a certain way that we now categorize as a certain thing.
Right. And like, that's why you hear, that's why you hear slides. That's why you hear growl. That's why you hear flips. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason. You have to know how to do those things, and then you have to know why you're doing those things.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because we have these conversations with different, participants. They'll come through our Summer Institute and at workshops I do, where, there are a set of pedagogues and teachers who have the mindset where you just learn by listening and doing. And I get that, because, and for a lot of people in a big city, that is the ideal way to do it. But we have so many people that are outside of big cities, like here in Winchester. If you're in Winchester, there's not an R&B club, so you're pretty isolated. And my thought is, you don't want that artist not able to communicate. So it's kind of breaking down those stylistic traits and helping them learn what they are to start to listen for them to bring them to life. So I think that I always just like to clarify that it's not that we don't want to make everything an academic. It has to be, you will put a growl here. It's more about helping people understand, right, the sounds that are possible, that are acceptable in that style, so that then they listen differently, so that then when they start to try a song on their voice, they know what they can do.
Right. And then your impulses of when to put them in your own arrangements of these songs or the songs you're writing will be authentic.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we were talking, and we brought it up just a minute ago, talking about, all the turmoil. And this is another style of music that lives around a lot of that, which is protest rock. Let's talk a little bit about that.
I mean, so, and I wasn't, I'm not quite old enough to have been alive this long ago, but, Vietnam, I feel like is one of the defining moments of change in our country for so many reasons. So, this war was saying it was controversial is an understatement. And many Americans, especially young Americans, really did not believe in this war. And it was their age group that was getting sent and, off and being killed in just mass quantities. And this is the age of, not just radio anymore, but now there are TVs. And so now there's news that can tell you that. And so there's more media sources that can get to that information to you and have that information permeate your soul. So you're realizing this, and you're realizing that that's happening and shouldn't be happening. Or you're drafted and you're like, I refuse to go do something and lose my life for something I don't believe in, right? So people started protesting. And, a lot of these protests were peaceful, but they were not appreciated by the government. That's an understatement, right? And so, and I want you to talk about that, because I think of you as, somebody I go to when I have questions about rock. But, there are so many movements that are born in this time, like the burning the bras of the women's lib, and and I think about civil rights a lot as affecting this movement. And so there's music that then comes out of what people are experiencing and seeing. And so I think all music communicates at a visceral level, and also with lyrics. And people are using this music to unleash and to help people process feelings, but also to communicate protest, right? And so there are bands making songs that are directly about this protest. We were just talking about one before. Matt, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. So Ohio, I was mentioned before the show started, Ohio by Crosby, Stills and Nash. You know, it's a classic song. And when I teach it to my students, we go and we look at what actually happened at Kent State. My brothers both went to Kent State. And, you know, we talk about how like it was in their quad. And we talk about what if you were out just protesting in our quad. And because the government was so upset about this, they send in the National Guard. And the National Guard then starts gassing the students. And then at a certain point, pulls their guns out and starts shooting the students. And today, if you go to the Kent State campus, the parking lot where it was next to this, they have spots blocked off in the parking lot because that's where students died. And to help your students today realize like that was the turmoil that fueled that song. Or to listen to Edwin Starr singing War, you know, where he's saying war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And you hear the growl in his voice and the agitation in his voice and the growl in the drums. And you're really getting where these youth were coming from and helping our students realize that could have been you, right? Or go listen to Eve of Destruction, and which is one I always like to look at. And you listen to the words of Eve of Destruction and you realize it's not that far off from where we are today, 60 years later. And why are we still there? You know, and then like you mentioned, we talk about a lot about, you know, race and the issues that were happening then with desegregation. But then like Black Day in July, which is a song written about a raid that went down in Detroit, where white cops specifically targeted a black bar, and the city came up and rose up in protest, and they burned down big parts of the city, right? Or you look at MLK's death and what happened with MLK. You look at Malcolm X and what happened with him. You look at the Kennedy assassinations. And to help students really realize that you're living in a decade where there's death and destruction all around, and people are reacting by writing songs that address that specifically. And I think that when students realize that, it's a powerful message for them. And then you say, now let's look at today. And then I always like to connect the dots to, by the way, why are we still dealing with the same crap? And why haven't we moved beyond that at this point in time? Because I think that also helps our students figure out their own voice and what's important to them and how they want to go out and impact the world beyond just singing a song that they like.
Right. Right. And, you know, and I mean, in protest rock, there's so, you know, there's protest rock and there's protest, you know, folk, and they're both helping. I mean, the artists are expressing their feelings, right? And it's helping them process, but it's also helping the listeners, right? And it's also protesting. I mean, it's their gift to the movements, you know? Yeah. So I mean, I love that music. And I mean, to think that there's, you know, both, you know, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and there's Jimi Hendrix, and there's the Supremes, you know, and Barry Gordon making that. And like all of that music's happening at once, and it's all communicating, you know, your emotions, your opinions, and trying to make change. Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. And that's why that music sounds that way, you know? And so, you know, and that's why if you start listening to the styles in those music, you know, like if you're like, oh, wow, okay, well, what's rock? What's that sound like? You know, and you start analyzing it, it's just so cool to be able to trace it to why.
Yeah. You bring up a good point too, is not to forget the bands who weren't necessarily only singing about the things they were protesting, but like Jimi Hendrix and the electric guitar, flipping it over because he was a lefty and playing the right upside down, playing Woodstock. I mean, just like, you know, there's just all kinds of things that were maybe not directly saying I'm against the war, but they were protesting against societal norms at the time. Right? Woodstock's just one big protest against culture as it is at that moment, right? And a festival of music. And so, yeah, it's a great experience for our students to kind of tap into along the way. All right, so let's talk a little bit moving on. So the other thing we talked about before the show was that, you know, when that Kent State shooting happened, some of the music history books say that was a real wake-up call to the youth, where they realized, wow, if we keep protesting, our government's just going to kill us, right? Because they watched it happen. At that point, it was in black and white on TV, but there's film, there's video of it. It was on the national news. So these students start to realize that, oh, our government doesn't really care about us. And that's when they say at the same time, we're seeing the emergence of experimentation with drugs. And then we see technology coming into the picture and moving, and that gets us to disco, right?
Yep. And, disco is, a reflection of pain, emotion, struggle, and resilience, and it's just manifested in a different way of escapism, right? Because disco is a party, right? I love disco, but and it sounds completely different, and and I'm not going to say that all disco has a 4 on the floor beat, but a lot of it does, and if you think about if we're talking about like rhythm, right? Like if we're talking about like that rock and that 1 and that 3, versus the 2, and 4. And then now we've got this disco, which is like, which is still in the clubs today, right? With that hi-hat and that snare, because people are partying, right? So so if you're thinking, okay, well, how does disco sound? What does disco sound like? What is disco, right? You listen to the artists, right? So you've got Donna Summer, all the way from her to like ABBA, to Chaka Khan, to the Gap Band. And if you think you've got to go, if you have not done this, like if you're younger than disco, you've just got to go see these outfits. I mean, it's a completely different time. And I think it's just people needed to stop the pain and suffering of, the protests and just say, I have to heal myself. And that's going to be through different drugs. I mean, there were drugs in the 60s, different drugs. We'll say different drugs, right? Party drugs versus like, let me examine my feelings drugs, And so, I think the cool thing about disco, and then I'm going to always wrap it around, right? To like, this is why this sounds like this. And then, and then once you know that, then it's time, to learn these styles that are in each of these. And I thought I was going to come here and talk about that, but I'm having so much fun. But I guess I'll say I'm teaching a class this summer and I'm teaching pop styles to like learn how to vocally do these. But I'll also talk a lot about this. So anyway, but disco. So one of the cool things about disco, Gloria Gaynor, actually, she's like I will survive. She sang that song. She said, oh gosh, I'm going to misquote her, but it's something like disco. I think she said that like disco was the common ground for every race, creed, nationality, sexuality, like something along those lines. Yeah. And that's true. Like if you think about it, it seems like it's just this party culture, but there's the gay, Black and Latino kind of uprising in disco, and there was a lot of progression of understanding, I guess you can say, and processing of those communities. And because disco gave acceptance a home, I guess you could say. Everybody's on that dance floor with that, with those like blowy choruses and then those wails into the those blowy verses and those wails into the choruses. Everybody's out there dancing together, Yeah. So that's
right. I mean, but I think music has brought people together for a long time, and that's just continuing to bring it and propel all the movements forward.
Yeah.
As then continuing into the 80s. But I think another thing that I have always found interesting is to talk, like you mentioned, there's so many marginalized groups coming together through that music, and the students look at the fights now, but they don't realize that like homosexuality was labeled as a mental illness in the 70s. And the students are like, what? And it's like, yeah, that's what people were facing. And so then when they listen to the music, they listen to it different. And like you said, you have people who are fighting segregation coming together, as well. And, it became a unifying force, just as sports started to become. Hakeem Abdul-Jabbar, as he started playing sports and basketball, then people had somebody to look up to. And it was, the arts and some of this other things have been powerful forces in bringing our cultures together. And that's, I think, why it's so important to also understand that cultural history. And especially in some of these styles that people like more and more, like Mike's out in LA, where, we know I love our West Coast hip hop scene. But this is something, right, that's kind of like, it's been fun because we've watched it kind of evolve while a lot of us have been alive. This is something we've all watched evolve. So this is your specialty. Talk a little bit about it.
Okay. All right. Don't let me go on too long.
You're fine. I'm enjoying this. This is great.
Hip hop. Yes, this is my baby. I mean, in my opinion, like all life hip hop. If we start looking around, but I won't. I'll stick to this topic. So I mean, again, there's always a stew of stuff in the world that's happening to start music, and we've sort of talked about that. History in these styles that we've covered. And I guess I just want to keep stressing, I'm going to talk about hip hop right now, but I really want to keep stressing that these styles, these musical genres have such specific stylisms that are attached to them. And it's not that you have to do them or that you have to do all of them, but I just would love all of you to walk away and say, okay, figuring out why, and then also learning how to do them. Those are just two equally important things. That's all. Yeah. Those are my two favorite things to talk about and do. And I'll sit down with anybody who wants to have coffee and talk your ear off. Okay, but to hip hop. Okay, hip hop, born in the 70s, right? And I don't know who knows what, so I'll just say it was born in I think 1973 at a party given by an 18-year-old whose DJ name was Kool Herc, right? And they say it was born at that time because people wanted to dance, right? But people want to keep dancing when the record's over, because we're back in the time of records, right? Like we're way beyond. I mean, people are like, wait, what? Records? Like they can't even. What is that? Although vinyl's coming back. I just got a record player for Christmas. Nice. So people don't want to stop, and they don't want to stop when the record's over. And there's this part, there's like sort of the breakdown of like the really great dance break in every album, right? And he referred to that actually as the Get Down, which is why that Netflix show is called that.
Oh,
cool.
Yeah.
So that's so people in the Bronx, which was, by the way, where this party was held, didn't have music classes and didn't have, there wasn't a lot of wealth. And I will skip the history for time of why that is. But there's white flight, and then there's the Bronx fires, and I'll talk about that in a second. But so they don't have so what they have are, is a turntable and some records, either of their parents or that they save and they have their own, right? And they have parties that they want to do. So what they did was make two records, like when one would stop, like looping over basically that Get Down part, right? So, and then that breakdown and that combination of those two records at the same time, like goes like is credited to be that party, that breakdown, the birth of things. But it goes on, right? And it turns in, it goes from some, parties at the Bronx into a culture, right? So when people say hip hop and rap are terms that a lot of people use interchangeably, but I do want to say that, hip hop is a culture. Hip hop is, rap is an element of hip hop, right? But I think there are 5 elements to hip hop. I could say 6 if I wanted to say fashion, but I'm going to say 5 because I'm now making up my own thoughts, right? But you've got break breakdancing or b-boying, right? Or b-girling. You've got DJing, right? You've got MCing, which used to be like the person that would hype up at parties, but now is rapping. You've got graffiti, which was sort of a visual connection that was happening in the subways and everywhere. And you've got consciousness, and that's something that I'll talk a lot about in my class this summer. So you've got all that happening, and that is hip hop. Rap is a part of hip hop. And oh gosh, I'm like, where do I go from this?
Didn't they start, because you tapped on something which has been my understanding of where the rap outgrew, is that, so that happened, they started re-looping the dance breaks, but then didn't they start like calling things out over top of it? My understanding was, and then they play on the street corners, they bring their gear out on the street corners,
Yep.
and then start calling out, over top of.
Like in their like playgrounds, and they like hook up like extension cords all the way up into someone's apartment. I mean, yes.
And then that's where the rap element started coming in, right? As people started expanding on like calling out things over top of the loop, it then started to become more rhythmic, right? Correct,
because to try to keep people on the dance floor and keep the hype going, right? And yes, that's where. So for a long time, it didn't have it didn't have speaking, right? Then it had the hype man, and then that turned into rapping. And when you think about rap, there are so many eras that you could think about, right? And I mean, there's if I'm going to just throw out some terms, there's you could think of it as like old school, golden age, new school, or you could think about it as like regions, like where it comes from. There's a great documentary on Netflix called Hip Hop Evolution. I highly recommend it because it breaks it down by region, and I think that's a really cool way to look at things. But like, I mean, you've got. I'll do this fast because I want to talk about like rapping itself. But like, if you've got like old school, and then you're thinking that's like Grandmaster Flash, and like, so those are like some of the first like rappers, right? And like Afrika Bambaataa, who like a lot of people really like hail, and Rapper's Delight, if people remember that song, like that was sort of the first hit, right? You've got trap, which like I feel like everything is called trap now, but if I'm gonna say it's like Lil Wayne and T.I. and Drake. You've got conscious rap, which is my personal like baby, and like that's Tribe Called Quest. Hell, I have to take a second. And like Queen Latifah. You've got West Coast rap, right? Which some people refer to as gangster rap. And so a lot of people only think about rap as that. And actually so much of rap isn't that. And you've got crunk, and you've got lyrical, and you've got drill, and I'll stop naming artists and stop naming things, but rap, oh my gosh. It's everything, I mean, like if I want to say like drill, like you could say like Pop Smoke or Chief Keef or something, and like crunk is like Ludacris. So like sometimes if I like say these types of rap, if I say the artist, people will go, oh, okay, I get that, like I know that sound, right? Because they're different from one another, and they have different elements, right? And so it like. I guess I'd say if I wanted you to think about rapping, I'd want you to think about like the storytelling that's going on in rap, right? And so, I mean, do you remember, when people would get on the news and they said like, what they say, like rapping is the worst. Oh God, what was that quote that somebody said? Like rapping, it's like the worst thing to happen to like, I forget, but like basically they just attributed all crime and horribleness to rap.
But the funny thing is, though, is they've been doing that to every music style that's ever existed. I mean, when opera in the late 19th century, early 20th century, they were bashing vaudeville, which became more of the musical theater, and then music theater and all that stuff was bashing jazz and the crooners because the crooners didn't sing, and then they come along, and then you have the crooners bashing rock and roll for what that is. It's just like, I swear it's a thing of the older generation is going to hate some element of the new style of music that comes up. Yeah, it's like it's perpetually cycling that way.
Because people don't like change, I guess. I mean, you know, and you know, it's always a reaction also to what's going on in the world. And sometimes people don't want to hear that, you know. Yeah. But I guess, you know, I guess I would say with rap, a lot of people are really overwhelmed and scared of rap, and people are scared of it now, you know, and then like Hamilton comes out and people are like, what do I do? How do I even start to approach this? And what am I allowed to work on and sing? And, you know, so there are all those questions, but
so
like,
that's such, cause you and I, before the show, we mentioned that too. So, I mean, cut you off, you have something else to add, but we had talked about that, is about like with the students who are torn of what's cultural appreciation, because there is a lot of appreciation for hip hop and rap styles from white youth, but then also what's appropriation of where you're, you know, doing. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think, oh boy. I mean, gosh, in short, like stealing is appropriating, right? And then claiming it as yours, not doing your homework, you know, about where these things came from, not giving credit where credit is due, and putting on an attitude that is not authentic to yourself because you think it's like hip hop, you know, or rap. Just like I think we were talking before the show, like, you don't just go like put on some country accent because you're singing a country song if you're not from the South and you don't know anything about country. I mean, like it's the same sort of thing. And I think that, you know, that attitude in rap and hip hop and R&B, you know, I think people just put that on top, like a little Halloween costume, and then think that's good. And I think that there are a lot of ways. And I think my thing is not censoring. I think people can sing most music, and I think a lot of artists want you to sing their music and want you to listen to their music, you know, because they want to, you know, they want their thoughts, emotions, feelings, and art to be heard. But sort of what we've been talking about of like immersing yourself in the culture and learning about it and listening and doing your homework on those artists and knowing what they went through, and, you know, and knowing why these styles are here. And then really, like, if I can loop it to technique, really studying how to do these styles, both healthfully, because a lot of, you know, like, it's hard to, like, I'll just use rap because we're talking about hip hop and rap, right? It's hard to do these healthfully without fatigue, right? It's hard to rap. I mean, it's weird. You'd think, well, I'm just talking. I'm like, oh no, right? And so, you know, there's vocal technique to every single one of these stylisms that are in every single one of these styles, right? So, like, for instance, if I'm just talking about rap, there's tons of tongue tension work you have to do and tongue tension exercises. So, like, oh my gosh, wait, I know we're probably out of time, but like, we're out of time. All right, fine. I'll do it real quick. So if you're thinking like, okay, so if we go to like the Hamilton, right? And you're like, okay, I'm Angelica Schuyler, and she has a really hard rap in Satisfied. I mean, she's tough, and you know, and in the Schuyler Sisters. So like, even just like a simple line that she says, like, he's a bit of a flirt, but I'm gonna give him a chance, right? Like, you think, okay, that's easy, right? But you really have to understand what she's saying, and it's going by so fast in the show. And so that really has to be precise. And remember, that's a three-hour show. And so, like, yes, you could get that out, but could you get the whole show out? I mean, and even her whole song out without really understanding how to work your articulators, right? So, So like I would make somebody, you know, like when I'm working with somebody on that role, you know, I'm going to make them work on sticking your tongue out, right? And, you know, doing tongue release exercises in general. And then going to that line after we've done like, and just, you know, tongue work in general of like on pitches and notes for release. Then I'm going to make them say that line like, right? And then I'm going to make them say, and then I'll say, okay, now try to say, he's a bit of a flirt, but I'm going to give him a chance. And see, I think I probably even just did that better, right? Just because, and I mean, that's one line in one rap song. And every single style that we talked about tonight and more, right? Every single pop style has 10 plus stylisms, and all of them take that amount of attention to technique and learning. And I think learning how to do them healthfully, learning where they come from, learning why they're there, learning the history, learning the artists, and learning the artist struggle is how you don't appropriate.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that you brought up something is that there's a difference. Teachers will ask about, well, you know, I shouldn't teach hip hop or I shouldn't do this. I think it's, to me, what you just defined is there are the technical things that we can help with. When I lived in upstate New York, my next door neighbor ran a recording studio and he primarily worked with hip hop artists. And he'd have me help people out because I'm just like, I'm not going to tell you how to do your lyrics and stuff in the studio, but clearly it hurts. Let me show you how to get your tongue moving so it doesn't hurt anymore. And then all along the way, I'm just saying, hey, this is this thing. Try that. Do you like that sound? And then they go, yeah, I like that. And I'd be like, cool, then keep it. You know, or they go, no, that's not what I want. I want a darker sound. Great. Then let me show you what happens to make darker sounds. Let's see if you can do that one. You know, so I think there's also the deal with in functional voice training, you know, you can help people in a style that you don't sing yourself. If they're coming to you and saying, look, I don't need help with my style or my songs. I got it. But this thing hurts. And I've heard that you might be able to help. And you can help them make it not hurt, you know, but like you said, then it's just that knowing the line of which, you know, I don't spend enough time with that. And it's not, you know, what I'm steeped in. And so I would refer you out to this person who would be better at helping you build it from the ground up.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it is a fun world though. I mean, ever since rap's been creeping in more and more into musical theater, it's been fun to revisit some of that stuff I used to do in the studio and helping kids apply it to Hamilton. And it's exciting to see that coming together.
Right.
Yeah, you guys both said safety first, guys. Yeah. Definitely take care of your voices out there. So I think, and you might have summarized this, but just one more time, just hit this one home run here. So what advice would you have to a student, someone out there, singer, who really wants to go dive deep on a specific style?
I would say start by listening. Listen to those artists. Listen. Find out who they are. Listen to them. Listen to as many of them as you can. Right. You know, the Discover app, as I'm going to mention that again because I'm so excited about it. You know, but even sometimes Spotify is such a little wormhole that's amazing because it does say like, if you like this, listen to this and suggested songs and here's this playlist and you know. So listen. Figure out what's happening in the world at that time, figuring out what that culture is going through, figuring out the artist's story, figuring out maybe even the story behind, you know, the specific song that drew you. Okay, great. Vocal technique in general has to be situated in a way that you're ready to do some of the stylisms on top of things, right? So being with a great coach, working through healthy vocal technique, you know, for pop music. And then the stylisms, right? Learning the technique, you know, it is vocal technique, but you know, the baseline foundation vocal technique that you learned, right, is going to connect somehow. So like I just did this tongue exercise about rap. And then, you know, Matt told a great, you know, anecdote about how that person might've, you know, somehow along the way got a step skipped and you have to go back then and work on the vocal technique. But now you've got that foundation. Now you work on the stylisms and you figure out how your vocal technique applies to each stylism and what sort of, things have to come together with breath, with tongue, with, registration, with onset, et cetera, to make those stylistic sounds. And then figuring out your authentic way to bring them into the music that you want to write and sing. And when I say your authentic way, what's your story? What do you believe? What do you know? What's your history? And then what are your instincts with this?
That's great.
That's great.
So, look, it's been fabulous having this talk today. Thanks to everybody who stopped by. The list is so long tonight. I'm not even going to
doesn't even scroll for me over here.
I know, right? But it's just people, not as much questions, but thank you. We're digging and loving all the information, all the facts coming at them. So if you want to learn more about Melissa, check out her website, melissafostervoice.com. You can even find video of her masterclass with Renee Fleming. Yeah, the Renee Fleming. Working together. It's a great video you can check out to learn a little bit more about what she does. If all this interests you, as she's mentioned a couple times, she is teaching a course this summer at the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute, which is the Summer Voice Pedagogy Institute I run at Shenandoah Conservatory. So I can't wait to have her be a part of that this year. She's going to be able to come and bring in some new ideas into the Institute about all these different styles. I'm really excited for that. So be sure to check that out. Any final thoughts, Melissa?
Thanks for having me. This has been so much fun. I'm loving talking about this. Thanks everybody for listening, and I hope to come cross paths with you and be able to work and jam on some of these stylisms soon.
Yeah, awesome.
Or have coffee.
I like the coffee idea. I like the idea of getting back in person to be able to actually sit across the table. Yeah, and we're getting close. Mike, any final thoughts from your world?
Oh, that's it. I'd say it was great to have you, Melissa. We'd love to have you back, get some more stylisms training from you. So thanks for joining us today. And
thank you.
Scrolled off my screen, but one of the teachers said your story, it sparked them. They said they had a few voice teachers that they wish lost their voice. So I'm so glad that you got your voice back today to check with us all your great information here. So thanks everyone for tuning in.
Well, yeah, sure. And check in
you.
next week. We're doing another live Q&A next week. I'll be back with Mike taking questions from singers. We've got a whole list. There were hundreds of questions we're trying to work through. So I'm going to grab some of those. If you're watching tonight, you have questions, you can shoot them to us either through the app or you can jump on over to voicelessons.com, submit your questions. We'll be happy to do that. And we'll also take questions live next week as well. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by, and we'll see you next week.